I received this a couple days ago off of Vinted. This is the Everheart June book box edition of Her Spell That Binds Me. Since the moment it arrived and I unboxed it, I knew that I wanted to read this first out of my little haul that I got of multiple. And I finished it, I've got some notes, and I'm going to share it with you now. So, the premise of this book follows Iona, who is a young witch who joins a college for witches to strengthen their magic. She has been quite sheltered all her life. She's never really practiced her magic other than for like household chores and things like that. Straight away, you can tell that there's this imbalance of where she stands among all the other witches. Very quickly into this book, she meets Ariadne, who is a. How do I describe her? She is a descendant from a very successful but also dangerous lineage of witches. It's very quickly apparent how competitive their relationship becomes, and they very quickly become rivals slash enemies because in the spring they will have to compete for this kind of necklace pendant thing from Morgan Le Fay, the original witch. There's like a trial, and it's kind of built up throughout the whole book, but the actual trial itself isn't the main point at all, which I'm glad, because when I started reading this and I heard trial, I was like, please no, I don't want another trial, I don't want to read that. However, it's definitely not about the trial, but then the trial at the end is satisfactory. Well, I would say the main thing definitely shines on their romance as they kind of turn from, I would say, enemies to, I don't know how to describe it, I guess kind of, because it's very, one thing I didn't realize before going into this book, it is very sexy, like it's a sexual kind of book, and I didn't know that. I didn't know there was any spice in it at all, and I'm not a spice lover. I will get into my opinions about that later, but overall they kind of go from enemies and then it's something kind of sexual and then it's lovers, and their journey is very good. But on the side of that, you've also got this plot where someone is trying to kill Iona. That is just the general kind of spoiler free thing that I can give, but I'm going to be getting into spoilers now as I go through what I liked about it, what I didn't like about it, and what I rated it overall. Of course, I've got my little notebook where I've written my notes about it, so I'm going to do the good things first. The first thing I have on my list is Ariadne, 10 out of 10. I hope I'm saying that right. Let me just check.
Ariadne.
Yeah. Ariadne. Sorry. I loved her character. I loved her much more than I loved Iona. And the narration of it, I mean, it's third person, but it's kind of split between the two. Like they have their own kind of chapters. And I did definitely like Ariadne's more. I found her to be a lot more alluring. Her family history was a lot more interesting. At first, you kind of think she's going to be this based off her first introduction in the book. You think she's going to be this very broody kind of bully, but she's not. She's got a really sweet side. She's got an emotional side. She's got a sexy side. Like there's a lot more to her than it seems, and I just really enjoyed spending time with her in the book and learning more about her specifically. Whereas I feel like maybe we didn't learn as much about Iona, but I don't mind because I liked Ariadne more. Another thing that I really liked is the way the witchcraft in this incorporates all the different cultures. I found that so interesting, and I've not read many witchy books, so this might not be a particularly new concept, but in here I thought it was so well done. So all the witches, they come from all over the world and they speak all their own languages, but there's an enchantment on the school that means everyone understands each other. The thing is with these, incantations and your enchantments, it depends on what language you say it in. So there's a part in here where it says to produce light, you just say like English light. And it said in the text that was the word that produced the strongest power. And I thought that was so cool how certain different cultures and languages had different power levels and intricacies that they could use for the magic, and it changed the outcome of the magic. It was just, I thought that was really, really good. Similar to that is just the ensemble of all these other witches. I loved them. I felt like they were so good, and they were from all over the world. There was France, Russia, there was America, like all over the world, all these witches, and I loved them. I thought a lot of the names were really great, like random things like that, and I love to see just all these really, really different cultures coming into one story. I really did like that. When I read the content warnings of this book, the first one on there is bullying, and I got really worried that this was going to be like a bully to lovers romance, which I have none of. However, right from the start of their interaction of Iona and Ariadne, it wasn't like the kind of bullying where one is just completely picking on and berating and there's like a power imbalance. I thought Iona held her own against Ariadne really well, and it didn't make it uncomfortable and that like awkward kind of, that awful bullying that just takes all the romance out of it. So I felt like because she held her own so well, it it aided in making that enemies and rivals part much better. Whereas usually, if it was just a normal bully romance, there would have been a power imbalance, and I don't like that. It makes me a bit uncomfortable. So I liked that Iona held her own. I thought the rivalry and the bullying, they both kind of go at each other. I felt like that was good. This one, I don't know how other people will feel about it because I feel like maybe some people will find it annoying, but I really liked it. Is the character dialect, like the way they speak to each other is very, they don't say can't, they say cannot, they don't say I won't, they say I will not. Like it's very, they spell it out and they talk in this very old, like I guess old English kind of way of speaking, like this Arthurian way of speaking. I really love that, but I can see why that might annoy some people. I felt like it was really enchanting and captivating and just made the story a lot better. Now I have some specific points from specific pages that I'm going to draw on for this next part. I'm going to put the microphone here. This is on page 47, and Ariadne is speaking to one of her best friend in the book, Samira. All the witches have different sexualities, so they're not all sapphic. There's a conversation that the two of these girls have together about how Ariadne has been inflicted by Sappho, and that's why she's sapphic. Samira says Sappho has cursed you with horrid judgment. I really liked that. I really liked that it's like you love women because of this god, and she's chosen you to be this. I thought it was a really good way to kind of show sexuality and stuff like that. Ariadne says she's surrounded by her vice, like as in she's surrounded by just women, because Ariadne is a bit of a she has a bit of promiscuity to her, so it was a really good way to kind of show off different sexualities and things like that in this world, but base it on the lore, all the history that builds up this world. I thought that was so good. I really did like it, so that's why that conversation came to mind. Another page that really stuck out to me is, so for some context, this is when they're still enemies, Ariadne and Iona, and Iona walks in on Ariadne with some other women, and they're in the library and it's looking a little bit raunchy, and Ariadne is trying to test if Iona is like homophobic. Essentially she's trying to test if, because Iona isn't happy about the sight, and Ariadne wants to know if she's homophobic or if she's just uncomfortable that they were being so sexual in a library. And there's a scene where they're practicing their illusions in a classroom, and Ariadne conjures this illusion. She puts Iona in a museum and she's got all these paintings of women, and then they slowly start to become naked, and then they start interacting with Iona, and she's doing it to watch to find out if she enjoys it and if she is also sapphic, just to rule out the fact that she's homophobic. Like, it's hard to describe, but that was page that was page 78. I just really enjoyed that. I just thought that was such a cool like way for a character to kind of find out if another character is vibing with them, and that's where it started to change for them really, because once she realized that Iona is also sapphic and there could be something there, then their relationship definitely changed. Another thing I loved was the animal companions. They're called familiars, and Ariadne has a wolf, Iona eventually gets a fox, and they play together and it's so cute. I love that. I love wolves and foxes. I love them together. I love the symbolism of that. And I love the fact that even when the girls still didn't like each other, their familiars played with each other. I thought it was so cute. Now to get onto some things that I didn't massively like nothing negative to say about this book. These are kind of just my personal things that I didn't like. So, as I mentioned at the start of the video, I had no idea that this was going to be so spicy before I read it, and I don't read spice at all. This was my first ever experience with a spicy book. So when I say spicy, I don't really know what the scale is. I don't know if it refers to how much intimacy is in the book or if it refers to like the actual contents of the intimacy itself. I don't know, but there was a lot of intimacy in this book and I did not expect that. I knew nothing about that before going in. I feel like I still would have read it anyway. However, right, I had no issue with the intimacy scenes. I thought they were quite well done. They were, my issue was just purely some of the language used. I didn't like some of the words that were used in the scenes, and sometimes it pulled me out and shocked me quite a little bit, but that's just me being like new to this kind of world of spice in books, right? I'm obviously unfamiliar. I think the reason I don't like reading about spice in general is because the words, like I'm very picky with how things are described, and there's a lot of words that I just don't like, and this book just happened to use some of the words that I don't like. I wasn't particularly a fan of that. However, I don't think it's enough to like pull you out. So I'm not going to say that's a point of you shouldn't read it, it's too much. Absolutely not. If you love spice, you're going to love this. If you don't like spice that much, maybe still give it a go, but just be aware that there is quite a lot of it in this book. Another thing quite similar to that is the whole enemies to something sexy to lovers isn't my favourite kind of romance trope. I think in general I just prefer a tenderness and a fade to black. But again, that is just completely my personal preference. That's not me saying you shouldn't read the book because of it, but just beware that it is quite enemies to something sexual to lovers rather than enemies to lovers. I will say one thing I noticed is specifically around the midpoint for some reason, a lot of typos. And I understand that it happens, but there were just a lot of typos that really did pull me out. There was like forward slash instead of a space, and there was no commas in place where it needed commas, there was no speech marks in place where it needed speech marks. There was a sentence that just had a word missing and it made no sense, and I had to read through like a couple of times before I realised, it's a typo. Maybe you won't notice it at all when you read it. I'm sure maybe there were more that I missed, but there were a few that really did stick out to me, quite in close proximity together, which I didn't really mind that much, but also I kind of did. I would say as well, this is probably my biggest issue with the writing itself. I felt like a lot of times everything was told instead of shown. Even when things were shown, there was then a sentence that just told what was shown. Like it was clear that the writer didn't want anything to be missed by the readers, which is fine. And I'm sure it's helpful for a lot of people just to really solidify where they are, what they should be thinking and feeling about these characters and situations. However, I don't like it. I prefer to kind of make my own opinion and interpretation based off what I'm reading. A similar thing with that is dialogue. Characters would say something and then in the dialogue tag it would just reiterate what they've said. So I wasn't a fan of that, especially because sometimes it was very obvious what the character was saying and it just didn't need the dialogue tag to express it. So I found it, I'd say, a little bit jarring at some point. Not enough for me to say don't read it, like it's still a good book, but just beware that it is quite, it gets explained to you. And lastly, I would say another thing that just, I'm not a fan of this particular kind of writing style, and it's that every time a scene would end, so there was like, obviously you had the chapters and then you had a lot of scenes within the chapters with different, like here with this really cute little fox and wolf chase, like a lot of different scenes and time skips in one chapter. And one thing I didn't like, I found quite consistent, was a lot of these scenes and chapters would end with them going to sleep and then the next one would start with them waking up. I'm really not a fan of that. Maybe it's just because as a writer I've been told you should always end the scene too early and start the scene too late, as opposed to, starting when they wake up and ending when they go to sleep. Like, I just didn't like it and I found it sometimes a bit annoying to read. But again, not too big of an issue. It's not a reason for me to say don't bother with this. I think you should definitely give this a try. You love witches, you love, history of witches, different cultures of witches, and definitely romance. That is definitely the most striking part of the book. I suppose that's like the big appeal of the book. I think you should read this just for Ariadne in general because she's great. Overall, I would give the book, I'm really torn between 3.75 stars or 4 stars. And I feel like the thing that holds me back from giving it 4 stars is probably the spice. It's just a personal preference of mine. I'm not a huge fan of it. I feel like I would have loved it a lot more if it had less of those scenes and was also probably a bit shorter. I feel like it was really long at some points when it didn't need to be. Like, it's not a particularly long book when you look at it, but the font is quite small and there's a lot of words on one page. I just wasn't a fan of how much and how in depth the scenes were, but that's purely just because it's not my kind of realm. I'm not too familiar with it. As far as I feel like it goes, they were good, they were well written, and they were kind of deserved and earned, and I had no problem with it in that sense, but it's just a personal, like, it's not my cup of tea. That is. I would definitely recommend this. I am really happy with it. I do really like it. I love this beautiful edition, absolutely gorgeous. I'm so happy to have this and to display this. I feel like you should definitely give this a read. It's very, very good. That was my review of Her Spell That Binds Me by Luna Oblonsky. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you give it a read and let me know what you think. I'll catch you in the next one.